Замислили ли сте се някога какви са прогнозите за колко електроуреди ще има по света през 2025 година? Колега, вие замислили ли сте се?
Да, сигурно съм се замислил, но нямам спомен за това.
Така или иначе, прогнозите са, че ще има 25 милиарда, т.е. средно по 3 на човек.
Колко?
25 милиарда.
Колко?
25 милиарда, средно по 3 на човек. И повечето от тях ще бъдат смарт устройства.
Вау. Добре, нека да позная. Предполагам, че следващият ни лектор, който стои и чака да му дадем думата, ще говори за това.
Прочете го, не го позна. Точно така, Дawid Pacia е 1/3 QA, 1/3 DevOps, 1/3 екипен ръководител. Описва себе си като технологична откачалка и следва всички най-нови технологии, като дори разработва някой самостоятелно. Давид е носител на наградата People of Testing през 2018 и 2019 година и организатор на редица QA meetups.
Днес той е тук директно от Краков, Полша.
Директно с прекачване в Варшава.
За да ни разкаже, разбира се, за IoT.
Искаш да кажеш IoT, Internet of Things.
Не искам да кажа точно IoT, Internet of Pets, колега.
Точно така, да. И какво е това?
И какво е Internet of Pets? Интернетът на домашните любимци. Камери за кучета и котки, изстрелване на закуски, лазери, други такива интересни неща.
Аплодисменти за Dawid Pacia!
Hello. Yeah, kotki, kuski, whatever. Yeah, actually, guys, that's the best Dawid Pacia pronounced I've ever heard. Usually it's, you know, Pacia in Russian or even more Italian, Pacia. And in English, I've heard it once, Pacia. So, cool, very well done. Okay, at first, great kudos to organizers. It's superbly done in terms of logistics. So applause for them. And we can start. Okay, so Internet of Things or Internet of Pets, but there is nothing like that. That's just my name. But that will be context, just to make it more fun, you know, cats, goats, kotki, kuski. That's me. I work for Brainly. That's educational platform for students. That's no IoT company anymore, but I still have fun with IoT at my free time, so I'm pretty up to date. And as mentioned, I'm from Krakow, which for you doesn't really matter. That's why, let's continue. IoT, I've heard like 25 billions of devices. Now it's predicted to be even more because large companies enters the market. Samsung, Ericsson, Motorola, they create a lot of devices, and it's not like one or single one, it's like tens of thousands of them. So if we talk about IoT devices, I like that picture because that presents very well what Internet of Things is. Actually, what of you can define what is Internet of Things? Just, you can raise your hand. That's cool, like almost 10 people. So Internet of Things is basically what Internet is. You know what is Internet, probably, but for physical devices. So those physical devices can connect between each other, exchange information, make some decisions based on that. So for example, as you will see, you can have bulbs just communicating to each other, or blinders that opens and close when it's sun or there is no sun, and so on. And of course, you can integrate it with any software, as you have here. And actually, that's gamification, and I've seen a live example of that. So that's not just a joke. Let's start. So actually, I've started having fun with IoT like 7 years ago, and that was my table. It looks quite messy, and I thought at the time I need everything. And that's why it's so messy. And 5 years later, I still needed anything, and another company, yet another company, and actually, I realized it's not mess, it's everything you need. So, at the beginning, as I mentioned, Internet of Things, it's hard to even define, because not a lot of people have contact with that. But the major difference is, as the speech before, you have physical device, you have hardware, you can touch it. Like, you can touch the screen, but you cannot tell, like, you touch software if you touch the screen. And here you have the real device, you have hardware. So risk and challenges, and just start with what does it really mean? And I encourage you trying to scale those risks, because we like identifying risks, to your own context, which means software, mobile, and so on, because probably you will find something useful. So the first thing, everyone talks about DevOps and continuous integration, delivery. We want to make it faster, more continuously, and so on. And that creates a lot of issues, mostly false positives, false negatives. Who knows what is it? False negatives, false positives. Okay, you don't need to, you can just look at the picture. But in most cases, it's for automation testing. So you have positive when it should be negative, and vice versa. But there is something else. It's called flaky tests, which means for the same environment, sometimes you have false, sometimes true, and it's very annoying and very problematic to just find, to identify. And what are the reasons for IoT? Well, it's slightly different than for software. Because at first you have environmental issues, like with the car, for example, probably weather influence a lot. And the same could be with IoT. So temperature, humidity, actually, whatever. And the second one is accidental, I call it accidental ones. And everything connected with your environment. So I know you have wires, you have electricity, and sometimes it's lost. So whatever you can imagine as a accidental. The second one is connected with updates. So briefly, when you have web, you just deploy quickly. Amazon says they deploy every 2 seconds or 3 seconds. It's quick, and you can always revert it. For mobile app, it's slightly more challenging because you need to update to the store and then just wait for review and have a new version. So if you have bug, you need a few days, up to a few days to have it accepted. For desktop, it's probably even harder because if something is not working, sometimes you have to force the user to uninstall and install it again. And what about real devices? Well, there is something called brick. And we call it brick device. So if you update it and it's not working, usually it doesn't work at all. So you cannot operate. And the only way to solve it is to probably send it back to the distributor and just get a new device. Not the best user experience. And how to call it? How to avoid it? Well, there are a few mechanisms, and some of them can be applied to software as well. Continuous upgrade and downgrade, so between versions, because sometimes it's not just one version up. If you disable device and enable it after 3 weeks of vacations, you can have like 5 new versions. So it must be tested. Small batches at start, which for example relates to canary releases for mobile apps or for software. And something I called backdoor solution. So continuous upgrade and downgrade, it's the same as for software. The major difference, you have to create your own laboratory. You cannot just send it to Amazon and say, hey, can you connect it to the cloud? Well, it won't work. So you need to have it internally. Small batches at start, everything you know. So alpha or beta users, early adopters, or just trusted customers that can give us an input without giving negative rate on Amazon or Google Play or Google Store. And backdoor solutions, it's hardware related, so have a separate partition or enable wired connection to the device, and so on. So that's it. The third thing is that scale matters. Now, just I give you an example. In Amsterdam Arena Stadium, they installed wireless bulbs, like 50,000. The problem is when all those devices started communicating between each other, then you have so much packages in the air, they cannot be received by any of device. You have just basically chaos. And you cannot use Wi-Fi, which for Generation Z is probably a huge drama. But even more drama is it doesn't work. Some of them will be turned on, some turned off. So what you should do is just do reasonable configuration. Some of them can be disabled or just receiving packages, some of them just sending, and so on. And I remember just presentation for the customer, and everything was enabled. and half of those devices were turned on, half of them turned off, and there was no customer anymore. So that's quite important. The fourth thing, real user behavior. So identifying what the user can actually do. Like Sonos is a speaker, wireless speaker. You can just buy like 10 speakers, combine them into the network, and just listen, like as many as you want. You just configure it. You can have it customized, as many as you want. And that's actually definition of IoT, connecting devices between each other. So what the user can actually do? Well, and that's the place for your creativity. The most creative, what could it be, is just to not disable power, but disconnect Ethernet cable. So what happens if we disable Ethernet connection from a router, or we enable from the device, like two different scenarios. And you can really enable your creativity, or even more harmful when your device is updating, just to disconnect it and see how the world is burning. The fifth one, CXA, and that stands for Customer Experience Assurance. So that's quite specific. Just explaining what does it mean. That's my former company. That's camera for pets. So you have a cat, just as in this picture, just capturing the laser. You know, that's one of IoT examples, yeah, camera for pets. And what is the problem here? Well, if the laser is not working, it's just not working. So the customer can see it and send it back because there is an error with probably somewhere at the manufacturer. I send it back, I receive the new one, it's fine. But the problem appears when it's working not as smooth as I would like to. So if I have a laser being once here, then here, and then here, I'm frustrated because it should be smooth, like that, and just cut running. And I'm frustrated, probably cat is even more frustrated, because cannot capture it. And that's a problem, because that's the just negative review in application, Amazon, and so on and so forth. And that's how we build our reputation as the organization. And I like that example. There's another device from my former company. It's a treats dispenser. So you have cookies inside, and you launch it into the air, and the cat or dog is happy, or not, as in this example. So what was the problem here? Launcher was working, but too good. So it was launching too fast. And that's a review of one of the cat's influencer, let's call it, or cat trendsetter. I have no bloody idea what is the difference between trendsetter and influencer. Maybe someone can explain me later, but it was just launching too fast. And the cat was stressed. Every time it started launching, the cat just ran away. And this review was very negative, not because it was not working, but working not in a way I expected. So I was frustrated, cat was scared, and the company a little bit suffered because of that review. So in that terms, customer experience assurance was crucial, because non-working would be much better. So customer just send it back and receive a new one. In that case, well, how we can mitigate it? Well, there are multiple ways. The first one is customer support. For those people who work in product companies, you probably have a channel to receive that feedback from the customers or from the users. And I really encourage everyone, if you have support team, to use them as an input. So it's really nice to build the process combining support, communication with QA, and QA part can easily communicate to engineering part. So you have very smooth pipeline. And unfortunately, in many organizations, support team is separated as this part of non-engineering organization. And then you have engineering, and there is a wall. And QA could be a great place, great bridge to connect those two parts of organization. But it needs some effort. The second one is crowd testing, which means we send devices to the real users, We pay them, they test it, and they find bugs. So the same as for software. And the third one is whatever you can use as a real channel of feedback. It can be Amazon, but it can be Google Play or Apple Store as well. So how does it work? Well, we know people, we know humans prefer to give us negative feedback than positive. If something is working, oh, it's working. If something is not working, I can elaborate it a lot, typing the feedback. But why not use this feedback, just finding out what is not working? So for example, for me, connectivity is very bad. So connection is lost, connection is not smooth, and so on. And we can use that feedback just to capture where we should put more effort in testing and eventually in development, probably. The sixth thing, and this you cannot really apply to software, is high voltage. For US is 110, and usually for IoT US, unfortunately for now, is the major market because of the technology and because of the price. So here's the story, it's like very short story. Why do I put it here? Well, because of my experience. So I probably burned like at least 2 notebooks, few devices, 1 mobile phone, probably something else, because I work with electricity. So if I connect something wrong, it just explodes. And except for fire and smoke, which is fun, yeah, like we like to do that, but it's the cost for the organization as well. So it's good to remember that if we work with physical devices, there is an electricity. And the 7th one, open source. We can use a lot of devices, a lot of tools that are, like, if we pay, we receive. We can report the bug. But a lot of them are open source. And it's good to keep in mind that if something is not working, it doesn't necessarily have to be our mistake, but it can be open source mistake. And I faced it like at least 2 times. We spent 2 weeks trying to identify what's wrong with our code. There was nothing. The problem was with open source tool, and there was a small bug. And the second time it was the same, but just because having it somewhere in mind, it took like much less time, like 2 or 3 days. So good to remember that open source is open source. We don't pay for that, so there can be some failures. Okay, you have 7 points, 7 tips, how to avoid, how to identify risks. Even if you use it, shit just happens. Just 2 examples. Well, there are much more, you can just Google it. But my favorite. The first one is connected with lockers for Airbnb. So there was a company just providing a smart lockers. You take the phone, you come to the door, you have NFC or Bluetooth code, you put it and you enter. As a landlord or renter, you don't have to participate in it. So if you don't really like to meet people, you just give them the code, they can enter, leave, and that's it. The problem was that while updating, there was a mistake, and as mentioned before, all the devices bricked. And that was a huge problem. Just imagine you travel to the vacations and you cannot enter your home. And actually, you basically cannot, because there is no way to enter. Even worse is when you leave the house just to buy a milk and then try and get back. Whoa. That mistake for the company was almost destroying failure, because everything stopped working, so they had to exchange all the devices. So very painful and very costful. The second example is less harmful, but me as a pet lover is very close to my heart. So that's one of the pet feeders. And the problem here was, I mean, how does it work? Every like 8 hours, it opens, it feeds your pet, and it closes. So your pet is happy, unless it stops working. So the problem here was not with device, but with backend and connection between backend and real device. And I love the recommendation from CEO of that company. So CEO just recommended to feed your pet manually, which is probably not the solution we expect, but at least it was less harmful than the previous one. And you can find much, much more. But, you know, no risk, no fun. And that applies to IoT specifically. So at first, IoT is never just hardware. Hardware is just one endpoint. And then you have the whole backend part, processing a lot of data, a lot of information, and you have user part. Very often, in most cases, I think, it's mobile app. Like probably a lot of you have Xiaomi devices, smart bands, kettles maybe, vacuum cleaners, and so on. And I suppose not a lot of you use web part. So mostly it's mobile part. But web happens as well. So it's much larger than it seems. It's never just device. And there is a lot of backend part and data storage part, because we have a lot of connections, yeah, and hundreds of thousands of devices usually. The second part, and I love it, that's how I started and why I started, is practical usage at home. So I have a few implementations at home, but I much prefer that one. And the guy implemented camera in front of the door, smart lockers, and when the cat entered the home, it recognized the face, and the lockers were unlocked. And then you can see the example here. The cat was recognized, and then you got a notification on Slack, open the door. So that's very useful, practical implementation. If you have cats, of course, or maybe children, I don't know. But there are a lot of examples like that. Let's just use it as practical solution just for fun. Then there are really a lot of awesome technologies you can work with. So probably some of them you recognize. You have a smart home, you have Amazon Alexa that you can talk to. You have beacons and so on. I remember one example with Alexa, and it was quite fun. Alexa was integrated with Amazon store, so you could order something via voice. And the guy had a parrot, and the parrot learned how to order. Yeah, a lot of orders happened. So that's one of the edge cases that is hard to predict, but it happens, and you should be somehow able to prevent it. Then, as mentioned before, exciting real test cases, so the one with parrot, but there are much more. So that's the same device once again. That's one of my cats. Oh, actually, funny thing, you see here the barrel. That's another IoT device. This locator for cat. Yeah, there are such things. So when the cat goes out there, I can just localize where he or she is. It's fun. I was not testing, I mean, I was testing it as a real user and complaining a lot, of course, because that's my nature. But in general, the device is pretty fun. So just imagine you are at the vacations, you call the device, and you just feed your pet. And that's fine, yeah? You can feed your pet. If something is not working, that's a problem, yeah? Because your pet is hungry. But there is another problem we didn't identify, so just food and dispenser working too well. Just launching over and over again, and instead of having happy dog, we had a dog that should be sent to rehab after all of that. So that's unpredictable, but fun. And as I mentioned at the beginning, almost at the beginning, the creativity is unlimited here, because no one predicted it, but it happens, not just once. Okay, just one more cut, and we are done. I want to give you an example of how the market works. It's not only about IoT, but in general, about pets, and why investing in pets is so valuable. So this one is an application for, let's call it Uber for pets. So you rent a human coming to your home, taking your dog, and just going out for like 20 or 30 minutes. Fun concept. But less fun was that this company earned $300 million in investment round, which is one of the biggest in US history. Okay, so there was one more cut. Time for takeaways. And the first one, just to recall you, be aware of flaky tests. That applies to everything, whatever you test, software, mobile, desktop, and IoT. The second one is about updates. And I recommend you as well in terms of mobile applications to have an internal certification path, which means it cannot be released to the store unless it passed your internal certification, because that's what you actually do outside. You have certification process in Google Play or Apple Store. The third one, scale matters, and you can face it for software as well, especially my current company, Brainly, after everything started working remotely and remote education, so it was really unpredictable, like peak was 200% in a month. So it's worth to be always ready for scaling up. Testing real user behavior, again, you can quite easily scale it to your product, and I'm pretty sure any product. Focus on customer experience assurance. Just to recall, not working functionality sometimes is less harmful than working functionality, but not in the way I really expect. Worth to remember. Limited trust in open source applies to everything. I suppose you use Selenium, or at least some of you, or other tools. It can be the same. And it's hardware. IoT is hardware, so always be careful about just rules of physics and electricity. I don't know, and that's it. So we are right on time. Thanks.
So, any questions?
For such IoT devices, for example, pet ones, did you do usability testing using live pets to monitor their behavior before launching the product for sale?
Actually, there was a mention about alpha and beta testers, and there is a phrase in English, eat your own dog food, which means test your own devices, use your own devices. In terms of pets, eat your own dog food is very literal, and yeah, we had it. We had a lot of dogs at the company and cats, like alpha and beta users, and also almost everyone at the company were using the pre-release version of either hardware, but mostly firmware, which is software on the device. So yeah, definitely, and it's free. Yeah, you have workers that use this specific version. This is pre-release one, and the same with application. You can encourage people always to join beta programs, and they do testing actually for free and just for fun. So yeah.
Can you recommend a good automatic animal feeder based on your experience?
Yes, I can. Thank you. So the one mentioned here, for sure, yeah, that's my former company, and I use it on a daily basis despite I left the company by myself from the different reasons, but that's not the case. But the product itself is perfect. I mean, I love the product, and that product I actually tested in China. That's another story, how to test. And in China, actually testing in production means slightly something different, testing in production. So yeah, I can recommend that one you have seen on the picture.
Okay, and how to prevent issues with retail hardware, as it can be different from tested one?
I don't see any difference actually, because it's almost the same. Does it mean if it's retailed? I don't have any answer, because from my perspective, the process is exactly the same. You have just retail device instead of in-house device, but I wouldn't differ it too much. It's exactly the same in terms of process you define.
Okay, thank you very much. Бурни аплодисменти да изпратим господин Пача.